All right, race directors, course designers, gather around. I'm going to share some tips that are going to make sure that your race looks good, makes your event look more legit, and reflects your branding in the best way possible. First, a really quick tip, probably more specific to cyclocross, and that's to think about your kind of standout features, like your barriers, your sand pits, and anything else that's unique and going to draw a lot of eyes. So these are the shots that are going to be in the Instagram feed. So you really need to think not just about the feature, but what's behind the feature, what's within those sight lines. Really think about it and try to be strategic. If it's a parking lot, chain link fence, a dumpster, those photos are going to be trash. So if at all possible, you could think about putting things like a team row or a beer garden behind that, because that's going to make it seem like your event is really well attended, because there's going to be people in the pictures watching the race. So not only does this make your photos pop and look a little tighter, a little better, but it's going to give the impression of a really well attended event. If that's not practical, either because of the location or you just don't have these things, you could think about some banners, some snow fencing, some signs, or whatever you've got. So if we take a look at this example here, obviously this is a pretty big event, but they're using the same sort of tips that I'm going to recommend right now. And that's using the snow fencing here to really separate the feature from whatever's behind it. So it's cutting out some of that visual chaos of what's behind it, and it's getting that all-important branding in the shot, and it's a shot that's going to get shared. These, especially with these sort of semi-hoppable barriers in the mud, I'm going to guess there's going to be some pretty interesting photos coming out of there at the end of the day. So part one of that tip, branding behind the feature. Part two, branding on the feature. So again, don't forget about branding your barriers, but think about it. What do I often see at cross races? And that's branding on the rider side of the barrier. The rider side of the barrier isn't in your pictures, and I'm going to say that the riders really aren't comprehending a whole lot when he's hopping barriers in the mud. So think about the viewer, think about what's going to get shared on Instagram, and where that branding has the most impact. So now, more importantly and universally applicable, let's talk about finish line shots. When I'm taking a finish line shot, I want to be able to tell, number one, who it is, and number two, what event it is. I need that to be clear and unmistakable so that when you're scrolling through, it's instantly recognizable what event they're at, who their sponsors are, and why you want to be there next year. So if you take a look at some examples, obviously one extreme being the big leagues here in the World Cups. Number one, you're going to see these double truss finish lines. So we have the actual finish truss even with this finish line, and then we have a secondary truss, which is usually the start truss. Sometimes it's, I think, just there for the photos. And then you've got defense in depth branding here behind the riders, additional branding, so that there's really no shot I can take of this finish that's not going to have some semblance of the branding in it. If we take a look at another example in action here, so we have a shot, we see him crossing the line, and guess what? That finish line truss, nowhere in the picture. That's cropped out. But what is in the picture is number one, the start line truss behind him, framing him perfectly. Number two, we've got our side, sort of our uprights here. We've got our snow fencing along the start finish. And then, of course, we have whatever is behind him, because whatever is behind a person is going to be in the picture of that person. Again, national is a different example. Let's see. So for whatever reason, I don't know if there wasn't a secondary truss or if he's just choosing to ignore it. But when you do have people trying to get the finish line truss with the rider, you end up with these horrible, really wide shots where it's distortion. You can see the banner, but I really can't tell who this is. I can't read the kit, can't see the face. So just not a good look. So definitely not saying you need full arches. I know that's not reasonable, but really just think about your snow fencing, what banners that you do have, and what you can do to really clean up those sidelines and make sure that you're in control of what you're putting into them. Looking at that on a more local scale, let's take a look at some local events. So Yarmouth Clam Fest, very little branding to work with, kind of a featureless start line on it, honestly. And the races actually both ended in two-person breaks, which makes it kind of even harder because you don't have a field behind them to either kind of give some context to the shot or block some other things out. So really difficult to make that kind of a worthwhile shot. So this is just a wide shot of the finish so you can kind of see what was going on. Obviously, a head-on shot isn't going to give kind of any context to the finish. It's empty road with a bridge behind it. If they were sponsored by No Parking, they'd have some great brand signage going on here, but not doing us a whole lot of good. The crowd's nice, but really without any kind of snow fencing or any visual separation there, a shot of the rider with the crowd behind it, honestly, is just going to be kind of cluttered and a little chaotic with all this mess going on. So what did kind of work is on the finish line trailer here is actually the one piece of branding for the event. So if we kind of jump to the side, we can get some kind of cool shots here. Yeah, it's not your kind of typical straight on finish line picture, but I can definitely see who it is. I can read kids clearly, and I can start to get some context for the event. Little nicer framing here on the men's finish as well. I think if you go through the burst, you can find pretty good examples either way. So again, a little bit of a non-traditional framing, but making the most of the one banner that is there. So I'm not going to say that they had a whole lot of work to work with. I don't know what their restrictions are. But some branding on the bridge, some uprights here, some uprights here, would really add a lot, I think, and kind of make you a little more aware of what you are. Another shot. So not a bad shot at all. But what we have are the race director's famous porta potties behind the finish line. They all seem to love this. Yes, it's convenient for racers on the start line, but it's not ideal for us trying to take the shot. So we've got some okay visual separation just because this is a 300 to 400 millimeter lens at like f4. So we can kind of get away with that, and you might not have noticed the porta potties if I hadn't pointed them out. But if you're taking this picture with like a kit lens or a cell phone, you're not going to have that visual separation, and it's going to be much worse. So just a note, this also isn't necessarily the picture that I had lined up and planned in my head. They shifted way over to the opposite side of the road as they were kind of playing cat and mouse to the finish. So again, just something to be aware of. If you're trying to line up a shot like this, especially with, let's say, juniors, and the same in your 4 or 5 fields, you really don't want to pretend to pick where they're going to come into across the finish line, because they're going to surprise you. So luckily at this event, they actually do have some nice branding. You can see a little bit here, but if we shift over to the other side, again, we have the same branding mirrored on the other side. So just by shifting over a little bit, I'm getting a little more context because I can see depth between the riders instead of just those straight on shots. I can actually get a sense of the gaps, which is kind of nice. A little less for like the classic cover shot, but I think it's still a good look. But more importantly, I get that sponsored branding in there. And then we can see going to like the vertical cell phone or Instagram crop, picture still holds. I still have a little bit of that branding in there. So just another take on the same image. And last example, different race, same porta potty placement. You can see we're looking at this at an angle. This is actually the start line, this white line here. But we have our nice purple porta potties with a line, which you definitely want to make sure you're not featuring that in photos, directly behind the finish. But luckily we have kind of the tent row here. Again, a little chaotic looking. I think it'd be really nice if there was some snow fencing instead of just this course tape to help give us some separation. And I mean, obviously protect your finish line a little better too, but that is what it is. But you can imagine kind of if we'd been able to mirror this banner on both sides, it would definitely help clean up these shots a little bit. So hopefully something to think about when you're designing your next finish line. Investments in these kind of visual enhancements can really make a difference in how your event is perceived in the pictures, make your event look more legit, better run, and really better attended, and help your community grow. So thanks. Let me know if you have any questions.